day when the preacher, who was standing at the door as he always did after the sermon to shake hands, grabbed my friend by the hand, pulled him aside, and then the pastor said to him, "You need to join the army of the Lord." The friend replied, "I'm already in the army of the Lord, Pastor." Pastor questioned him, "How come I don't see you except at Christmas and Easter?" He whispered back, "I'm in the Secret Service." When Paul asked me to preach today, he pointed out that this was the first of Advent, and the sermon should have at least a little bit of bearing on it. And because God had given me a message for today's sermon some time before, I was a little worried whether there was a relation between the text we have just read and Advent. But after thinking and praying to God about this, God showed me this is all about Advent, in the true sense of the word. We must not get misled by Advent meaning eating chocolates, lighting candles, drinking glühwein, and eating nuts. No, rather, Advent, as Bob so beautifully described the history, is all about the original advent of the Messiah. The Savior is what this passage is all about that we just read. The coming of the long-awaited Messiah the Jews had so desperately waited and looked for. Now, as we look at the passage, it's always helpful to consider the style of the author, his purpose, and the setting, as well as to those whom it was addressed. John's style is very simple historical accounts. He presents all around the life of Jesus as it occurs. You could call these like history blocks, where you can build a house together afterwards. Personal stories of encounter are frequently used to demonstrate who Jesus is, and what the responses of his contemporaries were. It is interesting to note that there are no parables at all in the Gospel of John. It's all historical. It's helpful also to remember that John is writing for mainly Jewish audience. He structures the Gospel around events in the Jewish calendar, and his stories are set more frequently in Jerusalem than in any of the other Gospels. And when considering issues, he often starts with a Jewish view and perspective. So let's try and do that. Look at the whole story of today's passage through the eyes of the Jews as they would have seen it at that time. So the audience this is addressed to, they were people who believed in God, in one God, to be specific, God defined as the one who created the world out of nothing by his spoken word. But the audience will also have known that relationship with God tragically broke with the introduction of sin, as Adam and Eve turned their backs on God and pursued their own ways, upon which there followed the giving of the law, which as a substitute guide to God for mankind, a law that required fulfilling, but was in reality not fulfillable, and constantly showed up new holes in the relationship and communion to God. But there had been promised in the scriptures that there would be one who comes to restore the relationship, the Messiah. And there was, at that time, a renewed discussion on whether the Messiah was near, was soon to come. And in today's passage, John focuses on the question the Jewish people were now increasingly wrestling with. Who was this Jesus? Could he truly be their Messiah? And to help them discern, they had actually been given quite a lot of information in the scriptures about clues. And one of them was already addressed by Bob. And let's just look at the multitude of clues they had to look out for a Messiah. Samuel and 1 Chronicles say the Messiah's ancestry will be from the house of David. Micah 5 states the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. Daniel 9 states the Messiah will come before the destruction of the second temple. Isaiah 7 states that the Messiah will be born of a virgin maiden. Zechariah 9 states that the Messiah will arrive in Jerusalem riding a donkey. Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22 both state the Messiah will be rejected by many of his own people and led to death. Daniel states that 32 years after his birth, the Messiah will be sentenced to violent death. Psalm 22, Isaiah 53, and Zechariah indicate the people of Israel will stab him and lead him to death without realizing what they had done. And that brings us to today's passage, where we observe one more sign of the Messiah. It's Isaiah 35, verse 4. I'll just read it. Your God will come. He will come to save you. And then will the lame leap like a deer. And our passage from John 5 bears witness to the characterization of the Messiah. Now, as we look at the setting, we realize the place where all this was happening was Bethesda, which, as you probably all know, is mercy, the word for mercy, befitting to what was to happen here. But let's see how the events unfolded, and we read verses 2 to 3. Now, there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Now the description of the place with 5 covered colonnades implies that this was quite a large area, sort of like a sick gathering place, a primitive hospital perhaps, where they could even live. And in verse 5 it goes on, one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" 2 questions come to mind in response to Jesus' question. How come Jesus chose this person? There were so many suffering people there. How come he chose him? And why are we not given a name of the person? Let's come to the first question. Why did Jesus choose this person? From what we know from the text, I think it is because he was the most hopeless case. How much more hopeless and bitter can you be after 38 years of trying to get well and failing? This person was the living example of failed hopes. One who had seen and experienced the impossibility of the set requirements to get better. We'll read about these later. Secondly, why are we given no name? And I think it is because when we read the text as a whole, it seems to me that we are given no name so that each and every one of us can fill in their own name here and learn about Jesus. And then we read in the latter part of verse 6, Jesus asked him, "Do you want to get well?" I mean, first, that's quite a question, isn't it? Lying there for 38 years, pretty much a lifetime spent with trying to get well. I think it's such an obvious question, isn't it? We'd expect a simple yes, I want to get well. But the answer tells it all. This person has given up hope of ever attaining health. Look at verse 7. "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." So the invalid does not, as we would have expected, say, "Yes, please heal me." Rather, words are spoken that seem so hopeless and bitter. On his own, he is too slow, and with others helping him also. He has tried all methods to get cured, and all he has tried has failed again and again. And it's not only his own body hampering his access to the cure, it's others as well. Look at the words. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. You can really see him being pushed aside. So after a lifetime of disappointments and hoping in a flawed healing method, this person does not rise to the level of asking for help. When Jesus asked him, rather what is offered, obvious excuses, blaming self and others for not being well. Isn't that a position we like to take up ourselves? And in self-pity we say to God, well, it's because of so-and-so or because of that and that. What Jesus did in response, however, catches us all unawares. Jesus gives no requirement. No requirements were set to get better, just a command. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. 3 direct commands if you're particular. And then Jesus disappears suddenly. We learn that later on in the text. Get up. Jesus is telling the man, see, you are cured. You're miraculously cured. You probably didn't even notice it. Pick up your mat, implying move away from this place of sickness and decay. Walk. Do what you are made for. Live, interact, and achieve. Fulfill your purpose. Instantaneous healing, without condition, for the most hopeless case around, takes place at the command of Jesus. And what did that mean? For the eyes of the Jews, this was the clear sign of the advent of the Messiah. No one else could do this. There was no other interpretation open. And the Jews would have immediately thought of Isaiah 35, verse 6, then the lame will leap like a deer. Doesn't this also remind you a little bit of the creating commands in Genesis 1, where it says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. Immediate. We read in verse 9, at once the man was cured, and he picked up his mat and walked. Jesus restores to meaningful life. So the person walked and carried his mat, and he was probably on his way to the temple to give thanks for his healing when he notices a problem. He was the only one carrying a mat, and the day was the Sabbath. And he knew that there were strictly enforced man-made laws instituted by the religious leaders of the time, forbidding to carry one's mat on a Sabbath. So he is stopped and confronted by the religious authorities. In verse 10 we read, it is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. That's difficult. We had already commented that the man would have known that it was forbidden to carry a mat on the Sabbath. But probably within his reasoning, he reasoned something like this. The authority that healed me is the one I submit to. And therefore, when I am told to specifically carry my mat, I will. So he replies in defense of his actions in verse 11, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. And in verse 12 they ask him, well, who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk? And here comes another really surprising admission of the healed person. In verse 13, the man who was healed had no idea who it was who healed him. Why? For Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Equally important to notice is the question that the religious leaders did not ask. They did not mention this amazing feat of healing or seem concerned about it. It's not even mentioned. The healing should have been the good news of the day, a truly marvelous, indisputable miracle only accomplishable through the divine Creator. And this was surely something way beyond the breaking of a man-made piddly little rule of not carrying a mat on a Sabbath. Why are they not curious as to what this miracle meant? And we see two kinds of reasoning occurring based on the same miraculous event. One was along the lines of the following: the one who got healed. I'm miraculously healed by God, so it must be okay to obey the same voice that told me to carry my mat. The other opposing reasoning was along these lines: the person is breaking the law, so therefore he can't be from God. In fact, the many man-made laws peddled by the religious leaders of the day seem similar to the method of healing peddled at the Bethesda pool. How could mercy, which was the name of Bethesda, the merciful healing, be restricted to the precondition of being first submerged in the stirred water and leaving most others unhealed? In fact, who cares if you're pushed away to the side as long as you're first? It makes no sense. A further question I'm sure many of us would like to ask is, why did Jesus slip away from the crowd after the healing? Why did he not make himself known? And I think there are probably several reasons, but I'll just mention two. Jesus never wanted a spectacle. He didn't want spectacles. Jesus wanted a personal encounter where the crowd could not interrupt. The crowd is very often an interrupter in the Gospels. And this is what happened, and in verse 14 we read, later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." This is Jesus the pursuant. He found him. He revealed himself to him. He sought him out personally. Remember, it was Jesus who initiated the relationship. Jesus chose to address the man and ask him, "Do you want to be healed?" And Jesus again, after he's healed, follows him and seeks him out. He is not finished. He needs to address the person personally, not in a big crowd where it would be embarrassing to see the private sins exposed before the crowd for all to see, but on a one-to-one personal encounter. This is our God, a personal God, addressing us individually, seeking us out. Doesn't that remind you of a different time when Jesus uttered similar words, a little further on in John actually, John 8, verse 11, when the religious leaders had brought to Jesus a woman caught in adultery to see what he would do in the face of the law being broken, and after the religious authorities had been challenged that the one with no sin can cast the first stone, and they all leave, and Jesus asks her, "Woman, where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you?" "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. And the same words come, "Now go and sin no more." After getting to know Jesus, the following of Jesus, sin no more. It is God bringing mercy to the needy that is the original Advent. The gift of free healing, bodily and of us as a whole, brought to us personally. The original Advent with God coming to us, approaching us at a personal level, at our need level. Jesus addresses another topic, the topic that some sin directly leads to physical sickness, and that despite being healed, completely healed by Jesus, that this healthy state can be lost again through continuing with the sin. And again, we are not told what the sin is, but the person knew, and Jesus knew, and that suffices. And it is a somber warning that is made by Jesus in verse 15. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you. Figuratively, it's like putting down your mat in the place of sickness again. So what can we take home from today's message? Well, we started with a hopeless situation on a Sabbath. But Jesus comes to seek out the hopeless cases. Jesus approaches us as our true Advent, our true Savior. He takes away our inability, despite our not initially recognizing him. What mercy. And I'd like to leave with the words of the 3 commands Jesus gave. Get up, meaning Jesus heals. Pick up your mat. Move away from this place of sickness and despair. Walk. Do what you were made for. Live your life. And I would like to hand back over to Bob at this point as we continue with the worship service.